case in Ozark is hot again, nearly 2 decades later.
An arrest in connection with the 1999 shooting deaths of 2 Dothan teenagers.
J.B. Beasley and Tracie Hawlett were on their way to a birthday party that July, and they got lost. And so they stopped in Ozark to call Tracie's mom to say that they were coming back home.
11:35 p.m., July 31st, 1999, a payphone outside a closed store in Ozark, Alabama. 17-year-old Tracie Hawlett picked up the receiver and dialed her mother's number. Carol Roberts heard her daughter's voice, calm, normal. Tracie said they had gotten lost but had found their way and were heading home. Her last words before hanging up were,
"Mom, I love you. I'll be home soon."
Carol would never hear her daughter's voice again. The following morning, police opened the trunk of a black Mazda on a quiet street and found 2 teenage girls inside. Each had suffered a gunshot wound to the head. One was Tracie Hawlett, the other was her best friend, J.B. Beasley. Just hours earlier, the 2 17-year-olds had been driving to a birthday party. Investigators had the killer's DNA from the very first day. Yet his identity remained unknown for 20 years. Think about this. 2 17-year-old girls, the last words Tracie Hawlett ever spoke to her mother were, "I love you and I will be home soon." And for almost 20 years neither mother received a single answer about what happened to their daughters. Who killed my daughter? Summer 1999, Dothan, Alabama, a city of 60,000 people near the borders of Florida and Georgia, where neighbors knew each other by name and teenagers spent their summers at backyard parties without thinking there was anything to fear. J.B. Beasley was just weeks away from turning 17. She was an honor student, a cheerleader, and a member of the Junior Honor Society. Her mother, Cheryl Burkett, called her daughter a wonderful gift. Her best friend, Tracie Hawlett, was always by her side. If J.B. was somewhere, Tracie was usually there too. July 31st, 1999 was J.B.'s birthday night, a night that was supposed to become one of the happiest memories of the year. At 10:05 p.m., the girls left Dothan in a black Mazda 929, heading to a party about 10 miles away. Somewhere along the way, however, they took a wrong turn. Before they realized it, they had ended up in Ozark, 20 miles in the opposite direction. Shortly after 11:30 p.m., the Mazda pulled into the parking lot of the Big Little store at 763 East Broad Street. The store was closed, but a woman named Mary Lynn Merritt had stopped there with her daughter to buy a soda. The girls approached and asked for directions. Years later, Merritt recalled that the car was spotless and the girls appeared calm, polite, and well-groomed. They looked like 2 ordinary teenagers who were simply worried about being late. At 11:35 p.m., Tracie called her mother. At 11:36 p.m., she hung up. Merritt watched as the Mazda left the parking lot, turned right, and disappeared into the darkness. But the store's security camera captured something else that night. A small white pickup truck was parked beside a gas pump while Tracie was speaking with her mother. No purchase was made. No one ever identified the driver. For years, that truck remained one of the case's most unsettling unanswered questions. On the morning of August 1st, 1999, the families reported the girls missing. That same morning, less than a mile from the payphone, a black Mazda was discovered on Herring Avenue. From the outside, it looked like nothing more than an abandoned car. But the details told a different story. The vehicle was covered in dirt. The fuel tank was nearly empty. The driver's window was partially rolled down. The doors were unlocked. J.B.'s driver's license sat on the dashboard. Both girls' purses were still inside, containing cash, jewelry, and bank cards. The only thing missing was J.B.'s keychain, which carried the words, "Hard to get." For nearly 6 hours, no one opened the trunk. Then, at approximately 2 p.m., a detective realized the trunk could be opened from the inside without a key. He lifted the lid. J.B. and Tracie were inside. Each had been shot once in the head with a 9mm handgun. Both were fully clothed. Tracie had scratches on one arm, burrs stuck to her pants, and dirt covering her new sneakers. The pants of both girls were wet up to the knees. Investigators concluded they had walked through damp ground somewhere else before their deaths. A 9mm shell casing rested on Tracie's leg. Herring Avenue was not where the crime had happened. It was where the killer had left them. The initial autopsy found no evidence of sexual assault. But in October 1999, 2 months later, the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences announced a discovery that changed everything. Semen was recovered from JB's bra, underwear, and skin. Investigators also found an unidentified palm print on the inside of the trunk lid. Prosecutors publicly stated what many had already suspected. This was a sexually motivated crime. Finding the owner of that DNA would mean finding the killer. The theory proved correct, but it would take 20 years. Dothan was in shock. A reward fund was established. Investigators faced enormous pressure to solve the case. On September 1, 1999, exactly 1 month after the murders, a man walked into the police station on his own. His name was Johnny William Barentine, a 28-year-old mechanic who lived less than a mile from Herring Avenue. The interview lasted 4 hours. During that time, he told investigators 6 different versions of what had happened. In the final and most detailed version, he claimed he had heard 2 gunshots and had driven the shooter away from the scene. Police arrested Barentine. Local media reported the arrest extensively, and many people in the community believed the case had finally been solved. But problems appeared almost immediately. In all 6 versions of his story, Barentine never once mentioned any sexual activity, despite the biological evidence recovered from JB. The neighbor he identified as the shooter had a solid alibi. His DNA did not match the biological evidence collected in the investigation. Later, Barentine admitted before a grand jury that he had fabricated the entire story in hopes of collecting the reward money. He had seen nothing that night. The case did not simply return to square one. It became worse. Investigators had spent months pursuing a man who had invented everything for money. 2000s came and went. Then the 2010s. Dothan continued to grow. New neighborhoods appeared. New generations were born. Children who came into the world after 1999 knew the names J.B. Beasley and Tracie Hawlett only through stories told by adults. But for Carol Roberts and Cheryl Burkett, time never really moved forward. Simply accumulated year after year. Every July 31st, they relived the same night. Payphone. The final words. The black Mazda that turned into the darkness and never came back. The DNA sample remained carefully preserved in a laboratory. Year after year, no match was found, no answers, no justice. 20 years passed with one question that never disappeared. Who killed my daughter? In April 2018, the entire country focused on a stunning arrest in California. Joseph James DeAngelo, the Golden State Killer, was identified after nearly 4 decades to a revolutionary investigative method known as genetic genealogy. Instead of searching for a suspect's DNA in criminal databases, investigators uploaded the DNA profile into public genealogy databases where millions of people had voluntarily submitted their DNA to find relatives. Partial matches were used to build family trees. Those family trees were narrowed until they led to a single individual. The technique did not search for the killer. It searched for the killer's family. Ozark Police Chief Marlos Walker followed the case closely because he could not stop thinking about a particular DNA sample sitting in his own evidence room. 20 years without a match. 2 mothers still waiting for answers. Walker contacted Parabon NanoLabs, a company that had helped pioneer the use of genetic genealogy in criminal investigations. Parabon accepted the case. Their analysts began building family trees from individuals whose DNA partially matched the profile recovered from the crime scene. When Walker received the results, one name immediately stood out. It was a name he recognized from his own school days. Coley McCraney, 45 years old, born and raised in the Dothan, Ozark area. A long-haul truck driver, married to his wife, Janet, father of 2 children, no criminal record. Within the community, he was known as a respected and familiar face. Neighbors talked with him in their front yards. Members of his church trusted him. If you had asked almost anyone in Dothan about Coley McCraney, You likely would not have heard a single negative word. That was exactly why his DNA had never appeared in any criminal database. Walker did not approach him as a suspect. Instead, he invited McCraney to the police station as a local resident who might be able to assist the investigation. The meeting felt more like a conversation between two men who had known each other since school than a police interview. Walker explained that McCraney was not considered a suspect, but that investigators wanted a DNA sample to help eliminate potential leads and continue the search for the person they believed was responsible. McCraney's wife, Janet, was sitting beside him during the meeting and supported his decision to provide a DNA sample. She had no reason to suspect that the request had anything to do with her husband. McCraney agreed without hesitation and calmly sat while an officer collected the swab. What he did not know was that Parabon's genealogical research had already narrowed the investigation directly to him before he ever walked into the police station. When the laboratory results came back, they left no room for doubt. McCraney's DNA profile matched the semen sample recovered from J.B. Beasley's body, the same biological evidence that investigators had preserved for nearly 20 years while searching for the person responsible. When detectives confronted him with the results, McCraney denied everything. He claimed that he did not know either girl and insisted that he had not been in Ozark on the night of the murders. On March 15, 2019, Coley McCraney was arrested. The reaction across Dothan and Ozark was immediate. People were shocked not because the case had finally been solved after 2 decades, but because of the identity of the man accused of committing the crime. McCraney was a husband, a father, a long-haul truck driver, and a familiar face in the community. Neighbors knew him. Church members recognized him. People had spent years speaking with him, working alongside him, and seeing him in everyday life without ever imagining that his name could be connected to one of the region's most infamous unsolved murders. Throughout the entire 20-year investigation, almost no one had considered Coley McCraney a possible suspect. For many people, the arrest brought a painful realization. While the families of J.B. Beasley and Tracie Hawlett spent 2 decades waiting for answers, the man accused of killing them had continued living an ordinary life. He went to work, attended church, raised children, celebrated holidays, and grew older while the families of the victims remained trapped in the unanswered questions left behind by that night in 1999. The trial was originally expected to begin in 2020, but the COVID-19 pandemic delayed the proceedings for several years. In April 2023, nearly 24 years after the murders, 49-year-old Coley McCraney sat at the defense table facing charges of capital murder and rape. Seated in the courtroom were Carol Roberts and Cheryl Burkett, the mothers who had waited almost a quarter of a century to see the case finally presented before a jury. McCraney made the unusual decision to testify in his own defense. During his testimony, he presented a completely different explanation for the DNA evidence. He claimed that he had met J.B. Beasley several months before the murders and that the two had remained in contact. According to his account, they had arranged to meet in Ozark on the night of July 31, 1999. He testified that his truck had broken down and that he happened to encounter the girls near the payphone. He further claimed that the girls gave him a ride and that he and J.B. engaged in consensual sexual activity inside the cab of his truck before they later drove him home. When prosecutors asked why he had completely denied knowing J.B. during his interview with investigators in 2019, McCraney answered that he had been afraid his wife would learn about the alleged relationship. The prosecution then began dismantling the story piece by piece. Investigators found no evidence that McCraney and J.B. had ever known one another. There were no messages, no phone records, no witnesses, and no documentation supporting the existence of any relationship between them. Mary Lynn Merritt, the woman who spoke with the girls at the Big Little store shortly before their disappearance, testified that they appeared to be nothing more than 2 teenagers who had become lost while trying to find their way to a party. She observed nothing that suggested they were on their way to meet anyone. The phone call Tracie made to her mother at 11:35 p.m. supported the same conclusion. During that conversation, Tracie explained that they had gotten lost but had finally found directions and were heading home. a statement that directly contradicted McCraney's claim that the girls had traveled to Ozark to meet him. One of the most important witnesses during the trial was Janet McCraney, Coley's wife. She testified that on the night of July 31, 1999, her husband left home and was gone for a period of time that he was never able to satisfactorily explain. On April 25, 2023, the jury retired to deliberate. The following day, they returned with a verdict. Coley McCraney was found guilty on all 4 counts. On April 27, 2023, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When the verdict was read, Carol Roberts struggled to speak. Cheryl Burkett leaned forward and cried. Alabama Attorney General Steve Marshall later stated that no verdict could ever fully heal the pain caused by the murders, but the trial had finally answered the question that 2 families had carried for nearly 24 years. Today, Coley McCraney is serving his sentence at Donaldson Correctional Facility in Bessemer, Alabama. In interviews from prison, he continues to maintain his innocence. The Beasley Hawlett case became one of the early examples of how genetic genealogy could solve cold cases that had resisted every traditional investigative method. In the years that followed, the same technique helped identify suspects in hundreds of previously unsolved cases across the United States. For the families of J.B. Beasley and Tracie Hawlett, however, the story was never really about technology. It was about finally learning the name of the man responsible. For nearly 24 years, Carol Roberts and Cheryl Burkett lived with the same unanswered question. Now, at last, they had an answer. Before you go, consider what stayed with you the most. Was it Tracie's final words to her mother?
Mom, I love you. I'll be home soon.
The fact that the killer lived an ordinary life in the community for 2 decades without attracting suspicion, or the role that a simple DNA sample played in solving a case that many people believed would never be solved. If stories like this matter to you, there are many more still waiting to be told.